Good evening, America. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're pulling back the curtain on something that should concern every single person watching this broadcast, regardless of where you stand politically. Communities across this country are being torn apart, and we have the receipts.
I'm Maya Clarity, and tonight on Truth Report we're going deep on immigration enforcement in America. We're covering how entire neighborhoods in Minnesota are organizing block by block to protect their communities from ICE raids. We're examining a sweeping essay on what America is becoming under the weight of authoritarian impulses. And yes, we even have a story about curling stones, because sometimes the physics of how things slide tells you a lot about the world we live in.
Let's not sugarcoat this. What's happening right now in cities like Minneapolis is historic. We're watching ordinary Americans, neighbors, parents, teachers, small business owners, make a collective decision that they will not stand by while federal agents conduct raids in their communities. This isn't abstract politics. This is people putting their bodies and their livelihoods on the line.
And what makes tonight's coverage different is that we're connecting threads. The crackdown on immigrant communities, the broader erosion of democratic norms, and even the physics of uncertainty, they all tell us something about where this country is headed. So buckle in, because this is going to be a thorough investigation.
Let's get to it. First up, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Minnesota Nice has taken on an entirely new meaning.
Alex, this story comes from Consortium News, reporting by Ann Wright, a retired U.S. Army colonel and former diplomat who resigned from the State Department in 2003 over the Iraq War. She traveled to Minneapolis specifically to observe and document what's happening on the ground. And what she found is remarkable.
What she found is nothing less than a grassroots civil defense network. According to Wright's reporting, originally published through Common Dreams, Minneapolis residents have organized themselves block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, into rapid response networks designed to mobilize the moment ICE agents are spotted in their communities. This isn't some fringe activist movement. This is mainstream Minneapolis.
Let's break down exactly how this works, because the organizational structure is genuinely impressive. Residents have established communication chains, phone trees, text alert systems, and designated meeting points. When ICE vehicles or agents are identified in a neighborhood, the alert goes out, and within minutes, community members converge to document, to witness, and to ensure that constitutional rights are being respected during any enforcement action.
And here's what's critical to understand. This isn't about obstructing law enforcement. The organizers Wright spoke with are very clear about that. This is about constitutional accountability. They want to ensure that agents are operating with proper warrants, that they're identifying themselves, that they're not entering homes without legal authority. These are basic Fourth Amendment protections that every American is entitled to.
The context here is everything, Alex. This organizing didn't spring up overnight. It's a direct response to what Wright describes as a deadly immigration crackdown. We've seen reports from across the country of ICE conducting operations near schools, churches, and hospitals, spaces that were previously considered sensitive locations where enforcement was limited under prior administrations.
That's a key point. For years, there was an understood policy that immigration enforcement would be limited near sensitive locations, schools, places of worship, hospitals, courthouses. That policy has been effectively abandoned. So when parents are afraid to drop their kids off at school, when people are afraid to go to the emergency room, communities like Minneapolis decided they had to act.
Wright's reporting highlights something that I think gets lost in the national debate. These aren't just immigrant families being affected. When a father is detained during a raid, his American-born children are left without a parent. When a worker is picked up at a job site, the business loses an employee, their family loses income, the local economy takes a hit. The ripple effects touch everyone in the community.
And that's precisely why you're seeing this broad-based coalition in Minneapolis. According to the reporting, it's not just immigrant advocacy groups driving this. Churches are involved. Labor unions are involved. Local business owners are involved. Parent-teacher organizations are involved. This is a cross-section of the community saying, collectively, that this level of enforcement is doing more harm than good to the social fabric of their city.
One of the most striking elements of Wright's account is the sheer neighborliness of it. This is Minnesota, after all. These are communities where people shovel each other's driveways and bring casseroles when someone's sick. That same ethic of looking out for your neighbor has simply been extended to include protecting them from what many see as unjust federal enforcement actions.
Let's talk about the legal landscape here, because it's complicated. Communities and cities have limited authority to directly interfere with federal immigration enforcement. But what they absolutely can do is refuse to cooperate beyond what's legally required. They can decline to hold people in local jails on ICE detainers without judicial warrants. They can ensure that local police aren't being deputized as immigration agents.
And Minneapolis has taken steps in that direction. The city has policies limiting how much local law enforcement cooperates with federal immigration authorities. But what right documents goes beyond official policy? This is citizen action. This is democracy at the most local, most personal level. People deciding that they have a moral obligation to stand with their neighbors.
Now I want to be clear about something. There are people who will watch this and say these communities are harboring criminals, that they're obstructing justice. But the data doesn't support that narrative. Study after study has shown that immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, commit crimes at lower rates than native-born citizens. What we're actually seeing in Minneapolis is communities protecting people whose primary offense is existing without the right paperwork.
And the human cost of these enforcement operations is staggering. Families separated. Children traumatized. Workers who've been contributing to their communities for years, paying taxes, running businesses, coaching Little League, suddenly ripped away. Rights reporting puts human faces on what is too often discussed in purely abstract policy terms.
This brings us to our second story tonight, and it provides the broader political context for everything happening in Minneapolis and cities like it across the country.
This piece comes from CleanTechnica, and while that outlet is primarily known for covering clean energy and sustainable technology, writer Steve Hanley published a sweeping essay titled In Search of America that places the immigration crackdown within a much larger framework of democratic erosion. And frankly, it's one of the most unflinching pieces of commentary we've read this year.
Hanley's central argument is provocative but worth engaging with seriously. He writes that America is under siege, but not by the people we're being told to fear. Not by immigrants crossing the border, not by refugees seeking asylum. The real threat, as he frames it, comes from what he calls fascist wannabe dictators who seek to enslave us all for their private gain.
Now that's strong language, and we should engage with it critically. But Hanley builds his case methodically. He points to the concentration of wealth and political power among a small number of individuals and corporations. He points to the systematic dismantling of regulatory agencies designed to protect ordinary Americans. He points to the use of immigration as a wedge issue, a tool to divide working people against each other while the real economic extraction happens at the top.
And this is where the connection to our Minneapolis story becomes crystal clear. When you look at who actually benefits from a massive immigration crackdown, it's not the communities being raided. It's not the American workers who were supposedly being protected. The primary beneficiaries are the politicians who use fear of immigrants to win elections and the private prison companies that profit from detention.
Hanley's essay draws on a long tradition of American self-examination. The title itself, In Search of America, echoes the great works of writers who've traveled this country trying to understand what it is and what it's becoming. And what he finds is troubling. He finds a country where democratic institutions are being hollowed out, where the free press is under attack, where the judiciary is being pressured, and where vulnerable communities are being scapegoated for problems they didn't create.
Let's talk specifics, because this isn't just opinion. We can look at the numbers. Corporate profits have reached record highs. CEO compensation has skyrocketed relative to worker pay. Meanwhile, wages for working Americans have barely kept pace with inflation. Housing costs have exploded. Healthcare remains unaffordable for millions. And yet the political conversation is dominated by immigration, as if removing undocumented workers from the economy would somehow solve these structural problems.
It won't. And economists across the political spectrum will tell you that. Immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are net contributors to the economy. They pay sales taxes, property taxes through rent, and many pay income taxes using individual taxpayer identification numbers. They start businesses at higher rates than native-born citizens. They fill critical roles in agriculture, construction, healthcare, and hospitality that would otherwise go unfilled.
So when Hanley writes about America being under siege, what he's really describing is a classic misdirection. Look over here at the immigrant, don't look over there at the billionaire who just got another tax cut. Look at the border, don't look at the factory that moved overseas. Look at the asylum seeker, don't look at the pharmaceutical company charging 10 times what any other country pays for the same medication.
And this misdirection has consequences. Real, measurable consequences. Communities like those in Minneapolis are being destabilized. Families are being destroyed. Children are being traumatized. Local economies are being damaged. And for what? Not for public safety, the data doesn't support that. Not for economic benefit, the economics don't support that either. It serves a political narrative, and it serves the financial interests of those who profit from enforcement and detention.
Hanley's piece also touches on something that I think resonates deeply. The idea that the America many of us were taught to believe in, a nation of immigrants, a beacon of liberty, a place where anyone could build a better life through hard work, that America is in danger. Not because of the people coming here seeking that promise, but because of those who would pull the ladder up behind them.
And this is where I want to push back slightly, Alex, because I think it's important. America has always been a contradiction. It was founded on ideals of liberty while practicing slavery. It welcomed immigrants while discriminating against them. The Statue of Liberty's promise existed alongside Chinese exclusion acts and Japanese internment. So when we say we're losing America, we need to be honest that the America we're losing was always aspirational, not fully realized.
That's a fair point, and it actually strengthens the argument. Because the question isn't whether America was ever perfect. It wasn't. The question is whether we're moving toward those ideals or away from them. And when you look at what's happening in communities across the country, the fear, the raids, the family separations, it's hard to argue we're moving in the right direction.
The essay also raises important questions about media complicity. When news outlets frame immigration primarily as a security threat, when they amplify fear-based narratives without providing economic context or human stories, they're serving the misdirection rather than challenging it. And that's something we take seriously here at Truth Report.
Absolutely. Our job isn't to tell you what to think. Our job is to make sure you have the information you need to think clearly. And right now, there is a massive imbalance between the attention given to immigration as a threat and the attention given to the actual forces shaping most Americans' daily economic reality.
Now, Alex, I know our audience might be wondering what our third story has to do with all of this. Curling stones and ice physics. But stay with us, because this one is more relevant than you might think.
This story comes from Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. Published on February 20th, the piece explores a question that has genuinely baffled physicists for over a century. Why do curling stones curl? That is, why do they curve the way they do when they slide across ice?
For anyone who's watched curling during the Winter Olympics, you've seen it. A player releases this 44-pound granite stone, it glides down the ice, and it curves. Sweepers frantically brush the ice in front of it to influence its path. It looks simple enough. But the physics behind it has been a genuine scientific mystery since at least the 1920s.
Here's what makes it strange. According to Nature's reporting, when most objects slide and rotate on a surface, they curve in one direction, dictated by basic friction physics. A curling stone does the opposite. It curls in the direction of the rotation, not against it. If you spin it clockwise, it curves right, when standard physics would predict it should curve left. After a century of study, physicists have theories, but they're still not 100% sure why.
The leading theories involve the unique properties of the ice surface and the running band on the bottom of the stone. That's the narrow ring of granite that actually contacts the ice. Some researchers believe the stone creates a thin layer of meltwater, and the asymmetric friction between the front and back of that running band causes the unexpected curl. Others have proposed that tiny scratches on the ice surface play a role.
What's fascinating from a scientific standpoint is that this isn't some obscure question. It sits at the intersection of tribology, the study of friction, thermodynamics, and fluid dynamics. The fact that we can send spacecraft to the outer planets but can't fully explain why a rock curves on ice tells you something important about the nature of knowledge itself.
And this is where I think the connection to our other stories becomes compelling. Because here's the thing about the curling stone mystery. Scientists are comfortable saying, we have theories, but we're not 100% sure. They're comfortable with uncertainty. They continue to study, to test hypotheses, to revise their understanding. That's intellectual honesty. That's how the pursuit of truth is supposed to work.
Contrast that with the absolute certainty we hear in political discourse around immigration. Politicians speak with total conviction about immigrants being a threat, about walls being the solution, about raids being necessary. There's no room for nuance, no acknowledgement of complexity, no admission that maybe, just maybe, the situation is more complicated than a slogan on a hat.
Exactly. Physicists studying curling stones will tell you honestly that after 100 years, they still have questions. But politicians will tell you with absolute certainty that complex social and economic phenomena have simple solutions. Deport them all. Build a wall. Close the border. As if human migration, a phenomenon as old as humanity itself, driven by war, poverty, climate change, and the basic desire for a better life, can be solved with brute force.
There's another parallel worth drawing. The curling stone behaves in ways that are counterintuitive. It goes against what you'd expect from basic physics. Similarly, immigration enforcement often produces counterintuitive results. Crackdowns don't actually reduce undocumented immigration significantly because they don't address the root causes. They just push migration into more dangerous channels and drive undocumented people further underground, making them more vulnerable to exploitation.
And here's what's really interesting about the nature piece from a process standpoint. The scientists studying this problem are collaborative. They share data. They test each other's hypotheses. They build on each other's work across national boundaries. Japanese researchers, Canadian researchers, European researchers, all working together. Because that's how you actually solve complex problems.
Meanwhile, the approach to immigration policy is the opposite. It's unilateral. It's punitive. It rejects international cooperation. It ignores the economic research. It dismisses the human rights frameworks that the international community has spent decades building. If we approached physics the way we approach immigration policy, we'd still think the Earth was flat.
Now let's bring all three of these stories together, because the connections run deeper than you might initially think.
Here's the pattern we see. In Minneapolis, you have communities organizing because they've looked at the evidence, they've weighed the human costs, and they've decided that the current approach to immigration enforcement is causing more harm than good. They're acting on evidence and conscience.
In Hanley's essay, you have a writer documenting how political and economic elites use immigration as a distraction from the real forces shaping American life: wealth concentration, regulatory capture, and the erosion of democratic accountability. He's following the money and asking who benefits.
And in the Curling Stone story, you have scientists demonstrating what genuine intellectual honesty looks like. They admit what they don't know. They keep studying. They revise their theories when the evidence demands it. That's a model for how we should approach complex social questions, including immigration.
The thread connecting all three is this: the difference between people who are genuinely trying to understand and solve problems, and people who are exploiting problems for power and profit. The Minneapolis organizers are problem solvers. The scientists are problem solvers. The politicians using immigration fear to consolidate power are not.
And here's what makes this moment so critical. According to reporting from multiple outlets, the current immigration enforcement posture represents a significant escalation. We're talking about operations in sensitive locations that were previously off-limits. We're talking about the use of military resources for domestic enforcement. We're talking about the detention of people with no criminal record who've been part of American communities for decades.
The economic impact alone should give everyone pause. When ICE conducts a large-scale operation in an agricultural region, crops go unharvested. When workers are pulled from construction sites, housing projects are delayed, driving up costs for everyone. When restaurant and hospitality workers are detained, small businesses that were already operating on thin margins go under. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They're happening right now across the country.
And the community response we're seeing in Minneapolis isn't unique. Similar networks are forming in cities and towns across the nation. From sanctuary cities on the coasts to small towns in the heartland where immigrant workers are the backbone of the local economy. People are recognizing that this isn't just an immigrant issue. It's a community issue. It's an economic issue. It's a moral issue.
What we're witnessing is a fundamental tension in American life being brought to a breaking point. The tension between the nation's stated ideals of liberty and welcome, and the recurring impulse toward nativism and exclusion. That tension has existed since the founding. But the current moment, with the scale of enforcement, the rhetoric of dehumanization, and the economic consequences, it feels like a decisive chapter.
And I want to come back to something from the Curling Stone story, because I think it offers an unexpected lesson. The stone curves in the direction you wouldn't predict. The expected physics says it should go one way, but it goes the other. America might be doing the same thing right now. The expectation might be that communities will be cowed by aggressive enforcement, that fear will produce compliance. But what we're seeing in Minneapolis and elsewhere is the opposite. The pressure is producing resistance. The crackdown is producing solidarity.
That's a powerful observation, Alex. And it aligns with what Wright documented on the ground. She specifically noted that the enforcement actions haven't achieved their stated goal of making communities safer. Instead, they've catalyzed a level of community organizing and mutual aid that didn't exist before. People who might never have spoken to their neighbors are now part of communication networks. People who were politically disengaged are now attending city council meetings.
So the question for our viewers tonight isn't really about immigration policy in the abstract. It's about what kind of country you want to live in. Do you want to live in a country where your neighbor can be taken from their home by federal agents while their children watch? Do you want to live in a country where fear is the primary tool of governance? Or do you want to live in a country where problems are addressed honestly, where evidence matters, where communities look out for each other?
And I'd add this. The choice isn't between open borders and the current enforcement regime. That's a false binary that serves the interests of those who benefit from polarization. There are thoughtful, evidence-based approaches to immigration that address legitimate security concerns while respecting human dignity and recognizing economic reality. But those approaches don't make for good campaign slogans, and they don't fill private detention facilities.
Follow the money. That's the oldest rule in investigative journalism, and it applies perfectly here. Who profits from immigration detention? Private prison companies whose stock prices rise with every enforcement escalation. Who profits from immigration fear? Politicians who use it to mobilize voters and distract from their failure to address healthcare costs, wage stagnation, and housing affordability. Who profits from the current approach? It's not the communities being raided. It's not the American workers who were supposedly being protected. It's not the children being separated from their parents.
And that brings us back to Hanley's essay and his fundamental question about what America is becoming. Because if we follow the money, if we look at who benefits from the current trajectory, we arrive at an uncomfortable conclusion. The immigration crackdown isn't a policy failure. It's working exactly as intended, for the people it's intended to serve. It's just that those people aren't the ones being sold the policy.
This is why journalism matters. This is why shows like this one exist. Not to tell you what to believe, but to lay out the evidence so you can see the full picture. The Minneapolis organizers see it. The scientists who admit what they don't know demonstrate the intellectual honesty we need more of. The writers who connect the dots between economic power and political theater are doing essential work.
Before we go tonight, I want to leave our viewers with something practical. If you're in a community that's being affected by immigration enforcement operations, know your rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to refuse entry to your home without a judicial warrant signed by a judge, not an administrative warrant signed by an ICE officer. You have the right to record interactions with law enforcement. You have the right to an attorney.
And if you're in a community that hasn't been directly affected, but you're watching what's happening and feeling uneasy, look at what Minneapolis is doing. Community organizing isn't radical. It's American. It's the town hall, the neighborhood watch, the barn raising. It's people deciding that they're responsible for each other. That's not a partisan position. That's a human one.
As the scientists studying curling stones remind us, the world doesn't always work the way you'd expect. Forces that seem straightforward produce surprising results. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is admit what you don't know and keep looking for the truth. That's what we try to do here every night.
We covered a lot of ground tonight. Communities in Minnesota turning neighborly values into organized resistance against ICE operations. A searing examination of who really threatens the American way of life. And a century-old physics mystery that reminds us to stay humble in the face of complexity. 3 stories, 1 truth, the world rewards those who look deeper.
The sources for tonight's reporting include Anne Wright's first-hand account published via Common Dreams and carried by Consortium News, Steve Hanley's essay at CleanTechnica, and Nature's coverage of curling stone physics research. We encourage you to read these pieces in full. We'll have links on our website.
That's our broadcast. I'm Alex Truth. Remember, the truth doesn't have a political party, but it does have a side. It's on the side of people who ask questions, who demand evidence, and who refuse to let fear override their values.
And I'm Maya Clarity. From all of us at Truth Report, stay curious, stay critical, and stay connected to your communities. We'll see you next time.
Good night, America.